Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister at the University of Toledo.
I think that a lot of people in our culture find a great difficulty in really finding a good way of dealing with leisure time. I think here's the pattern that I see so many people in. They are involved in working 40 hours or so a week, and people are involved in work that very often they find sort of crushing or burdensome, and they need to come home and have a drink after work and relax and have a beer and get on to something else. And then there becomes a period of time then that is set aside for free time, and the free time becomes sort of a frenzied kind of activity.
Joining Father Bacik in today's Reflections is Glenn Hausman, the director of Toledo Campus Ministry and Metro Toledo Churches United. Today's Reflections focuses on the topic of work and leisure. Here's Father Bacik.
Glenn, I've just found out recently that you like to play golf. And it strikes me that it would be a lot more fun out on the golf course than doing this program together. Although, I don't know, maybe that's not true. I think conversation's one of the interesting things in life, as well as hitting golf balls.
Everything in its place, Jim. We'll take this now and then go out for golf, okay?
Okay, that sounds like a good idea. But the reason I brought up the golf thing, really, was because I wanted to talk a little bit about work and leisure. And golf is one of my ways of finding leisure time, and sort of represents that side of it, I guess, for me. I think that a lot of people in our culture find a great difficulty in really finding a good way of dealing with leisure time. I think here's the pattern that I see so many people in. They are involved in working 40 hours or so a week, and many people who have jobs that pay more money and so on, and white-collar jobs end up, I think, working a lot more than 40 hours a week. And people are involved in work that very often they find sort of crushing or burdensome, and they need to come home and have a drink after work and relax and have a beer and get on to something else. And then there becomes a period of time then that is set aside for free time, and the free time becomes sort of a frenzied kind of activity on one hand. Perhaps it's like, well, now I got the weekends and I got to grab all the gusto I can get, and weekends are made for Michelob, and we're going to just go for the whole weekend, very often, I think, sort of blocking out what is going to happen on Monday morning. Or that people find maybe their free time is simply escapist kind of thing, like plopping down in front of the television set and becoming sort of entirely passive. In other words, I think that's one of the patterns that I discern in the culture, and it's sort of an inability to use leisure time well, combined with work that just isn't too satisfying. And we might begin to discuss that a little bit anyway.
Jim, the sad statistics are that about 9 out of 10 Americans are either unhappily employed or underemployed, and that's a startling revelation that we have so many people out there in the workplace that find so much dissatisfaction and indeed detest what they're doing. And as you've described it, they work 9 to 5 at something they absolutely detest, around people they cannot stand, in an environment they find totally abominating, and then they run in the evening hours and on the weekend and try to squeeze into those hours everything they really enjoy and love doing, and come back Monday morning totally exhausted, maybe hungover, and try then to put in another week at work.
What was the number you used? 9 out of 10?
9 out of 10 Americans are either underemployed, that is, according to their skill and
their talent
ability,
used,
right? Or they're very unhappily employed. And that doesn't leave very many of us, like you and me, that really enjoy what we're doing.
Where did you get that statistic?
It comes out of some of the work that Richard Bowles has done. He is one of the foremost career development authorities in the country now. And
is that book that people know, What Color is Your Parachute? Is that the right
also,
title?
He's written a later book called 3 Boxes of Life, and we'll get into that in a little bit because I want to discuss what he means by the 3 boxes of life. But he very well has cataloged for us this startling revelation of how widespread, how pervasive, and how deep is the dissatisfaction in the workplace in America today.
If that statistic is anywhere near correct, it is a frightening one indeed, and one that needs to be addressed. I'm thinking now that there's another kind of problem, and that is what we call the workaholism. I know some of my friends accuse me of being a workaholic myself, and I can see strains of that in myself, where where I experience the problem, I suppose, as a great deal of difficulty in enjoying the leisure time. In other words, a lot of times I feel better when I'm working, and I feel more satisfaction because I guess I do enjoy my job, or at least I feel good when I get parts of it completed and see some results at times at least. And so I guess I experience the problem a little differently, that I don't like to think I'm compulsive that way, but I do know people who are, who just have to keep working. I think the work becomes an escape, in other words, that people can't face up to their anxieties, can't face up to their limitations, and perhaps to impending age or finally to death. And work becomes a way of overcoming that, or keeping so busy that I don't have time to think about it. I often tell people like that, well, it seems to me that that's a better kind of escape than drinking or doing drugs, for example, or just vegetating in front of a TV set. At least you got something done at the end of it. And yet it still is not a full way of living humanly, let's face it. I mean, because one then is identifying oneself with one's work. That's all one is a worker. And for many people, what happens then is they don't have time for their families or for their friends. Friends are just set aside. They don't bother to keep contact with them. The children growing up never know who their parents are because the parents are so involved in the work site in one way or another. And therefore, I think it really is a stultifying existence and a very harmful, destructive one. So while I think that it doesn't do as much harm as drinking often does, compulsive drinking that is, it still is not a way of living fully humanly, and we have to find a way around that.
Yes, Jim, and we need to be careful here this afternoon, I think, of making sure that we understand that we're talking about a very complex problem, and that by and large the situations have to be judged on an individual basis relative to workaholism. There are those that indeed are workaholics, and I do think that is a dangerous kind of development in a person's life, and often does indicate, at least to me in my counseling with individuals, it indicates that they are running from something, and they run to work to get away from something else. And it could be problems at home, it could be problems with themselves that they haven't resolved, or some other situation. They may be scared to death that they may lose their job in this tight economy, and that may be motivating them to be a workaholic. But the key word that you used that makes the differentiation, I think, is that you often find a great deal of enjoyment when you are indeed at what you call work, whatever that might be. And I think we're moving toward a time today where that becomes one of the key factors in looking at the quality of our workplace, as in whether we do enjoy it, whether we have a high degree of enthusiasm when we're about our task. A student to me also defined it as that they have moments of high energy level as they do their tasks or their work. And that's another indicator. Maybe for a short, sustained period of time, they can get up at early in the morning, work all day long into the wee hours of the night, and they can do that day after day as they're about the task, and they find a great deal of exhilaration and high energy around that particular part of their work. All those are healthy signs, are good signs about the work. We're coming to understand that work is changing today and what we have known it to be in the past. For example, it used to be that we looked at work, say, before World War II, as something we did right after education, which was a very short period of our life, maybe 6th, 7th, 8th grade. That finished our education, and then we worked all our life up until, say, late 50s, early 60s, when people then died. Or if they happened to live a little bit longer, they had a little period of time for retirement or leisure. Then about the time the veterans came back from World War II, those boxes began to change, according to Richard Bowles, and people under the GI Bill, etc., went to school longer, say up until their mid to late 20s. and finished college. Some went on to master's and PhD programs, and it lengthened out the period of their formal education. Work then became a block of time, say from 30 years of age to late 50s, early 60s again. But what happened? Retirement expanded because people began living longer as our diets and our routines caused our lives to expand, and people commonly live into their 70s, 80s. Today we're even talking about 90s, and people live to be 100 years old quite commonly. And so we have a long period of retirement or leisure playtime. Bowles comes along now in his book, 3 Boxes of Life, and says the concept of boxes are all wrong to begin with. That what we need to look at is that education is indeed lifelong. We're all the time learning and re-educating ourselves lifelong. Work becomes that period of our lives where we're about the task of something that we enjoy, have a great deal of enthusiasm about, that indeed is pleasurable to us and productive and creative. And then that intermeshes with leisure, and often what happens in today's world is our leisure, our play, is indeed our work. He gives the example, for example, of a woman out in Denver, Colorado, who dearly loved to play bridge. And she could play bridge all the time, but she wasn't earning a living at it. And through some career counseling, etc., she discovered that there was a market for teaching bridge, and now earns a very lucrative income teaching bridge and playing bridge all the time, which is her work and her dear love and joy.
It's quite an ideal setup that Bowles describes there, and I think it represents something towards which we would like to move, where you see that intermeshing of work and leisure and education. I'm afraid today that many of us don't know how to deal with the leisure component as well as the work component, and we might address that a little bit more. I think that one of the things I notice is that people often talk about the Sunday syndrome, when actually they do have time off now and don't have anything particular to do, but they find themselves being very depressed at that time. People would feel like they had time on their hands then. They wouldn't know how to deal with that leisure time in a constructive way. It would be a matter of having free time, but not having constructive leisure, or not knowing how to deal with it well. And even I think sometimes when people go on vacations, they find themselves falling into this. Vacation becomes as frenzied as work. In other words, they have to drive so far and keep to a tight schedule, and everything seems to be going along in just about the same way. And I would think that part of our solution to our problem is to find ways of transforming our free time into genuine leisure, where we're doing something that's different from work. And I would characterize that difference as being times when we are more spontaneous, less rigid in our responses, less controlled by the clock, for example, where our creativity can be released, where we can do things because we enjoy them, because there's an intrinsic value in what we are about. I think that that's what we need to cultivate, in a sense, more in our lives as a whole. Whereas, let me try to set the frame the way I would want to respond to the problem. And that is, I think we have to look at human nature itself. We have to have a healthy outlook on who we are, what I like to call as a solid anthropology or philosophical anthropology, where we say that we are indeed a combination of body and spirit, that there's a way in which we live lives that have to be programmed and scheduled and have givens built in and things over which we really don't have control. But there's another side to us, the spiritual side, that encompasses this spontaneity, this freedom, this casting of our lives in a new direction and so on. And it seems to me that whether we're at work or in education or enjoying our leisure time, that side of us has to come out. And I think the modern technological world has really reduced that so much of the way we live our life has truncated that creative, spontaneous, even passive, contemplative side. I mean, how many people can spend constructive time silently? You know, silence, we take 1 minute of silence in our liturgies, and some people are just up the wall. They think a minute is forever. Their mind is all over there. They can't stand it. It gets scary to have the television off that long. And I think that that would be one of the touchstones here of whether one is able to use leisure constructively. The framework seems important to me, Glenn, as a theologian, to have in there. We are body and soul. We are infinite longings and finite capabilities. We're this mixture of the rigid and the spontaneous, the given and the free. And it is that controlled side that is in domination in our culture. And until we free ourselves up that way to let the passive, the contemplative, meditative side come out, I don't think we're going to get a solution.
Yes, I think you and I are in tune there. If I have a vision of hell, I think it is someplace where there is never a moment of silence or never a moment of quiet, but a cacophony continuously of noise and clatter and the clanging of bells and cymbals, and that would really be hell for me. And I think we're living in a time with the kind of music that is often on the airwaves, with the kind of you can't even walk down the street anymore and enjoy the sounds outside. You see people walking around with headsets, and they bicycle with headsets on to bring in this rock music, etc., and other kinds of sound. And so, for some reason, silence seems to scare us. The meditative moments seem to terrify us. And I think you're absolutely correct. We've got to find ways to infuse our lives with these times apart, if you will, times when we can enjoy the greater creation. And I say that out of my bias, and I know that there are people who would find that just absolute nonsense to them, because they would want all the technological paraphernalia around them to find a moment of leisure. They need that. They find their creative moments dealing with ways to put on a better computer game, for example. And there are those of that disposition, and I suppose that we're going to have to find some balance between those and those in our society who are more like myself, who would need the quiet time.
You know, we even need to build that into the work, don't we? I mean, there's times in our lives when the programmed and the determined and the clock rule us, and those are often our work hours. But even there, it would seem possible to build in a more humane kind of attitude, to have the work site correspond more with our own rhythms, perhaps, proper break times for people, opportunities to converse with other workers, for example. Perhaps giving people some freedom to manage the time the way they would like to, so that perhaps, the corporation once produced a certain product by the end of the day, and if the workers could figure out how to do that more efficiently and find some other time for creative activity, that would be all right. In other words, I think part of this is a structural change with work, as well as finding these better ways of using our leisure time.
No doubt about that. And I think I'm feeling, too, that I'll share another bias with you, that it is the liberal arts in our college-level training that helps an individual expand their notions of what is appropriate for a lifestyle. The technique, the training for particular technical skills, it seems to me, does not always add that dimension that the liberal arts seem to offer, where you gain an appreciation for the arts, for drama, for history, for the broader perspective on our human journey. And I would get in a particular plug here for a liberal arts dimension in our educational process that seems to me to provide particularly that value that we're talking about now, of how to appreciate in a broader, more expansive way the leisure time that we do have. And we do increasingly have it, because technology has taken away from us some of the toil and some of the drudgery of the work that we formerly did, and the time-consuming nature of that drudgery, to free up time now for us to be indeed fully human.
I'm not sure that people experience it that way, or that it actually happens. I think that what has happened is that the technology has freed us from the time right at the work site, but then people find themselves driving to work and home again. I saw one study that claimed that the average working person had about 1 hour of free time on a given day, a weekday. So when they had built in all the other things, the eating and the taking the kids to the softball game and so on. And so I think that a lot of people just experience, I don't have the time for leisure. And I think one of the solutions to that is that we would have to build it in. That's one of the things I keep trying to tell myself, is that I have to build in the time off or build in the opportunities for leisure. But I really liked your point about the liberal arts. That's the classical notion of the liberal arts, isn't it? Truth for truth's sake, contemplation. I think back to the Greeks. For them, leisure was what life was all about. Work was secondary. Work was something that you did in order that you could have leisure time. That's why they, of course, in Athens developed a slave society. You had to have 100,000 slaves for 25,000 free people who wanted to have leisure, and so on. And so I think there was a whole reversal. It's interesting to contemplate that. That notion of the liberal arts and the notion of the Greek philosophers had of what the good life was all about. It is totally the opposite of what we're used to in our culture. That is, life was for leisure, for contemplation. Aristotle thought the great things in life was to enjoy music and to be able to philosophize. That's what distinguished us from the animals, and that's what we should have the most time to do. Now, that could perhaps act as sort of a corrective for us in our culture.
One of the problems, too, I think, Jim, is we've come to the notion that leisure takes money. Leisure activities take money, and you've got to work to have money to have to do the things in a leisure fashion that you want to do. And I think it's a whole consumer-oriented notion that has pervasive qualities to it that are almost demonic, because there are so many kinds of things that we can do in the human family that fit into the category of leisure that are inexpensive or cost nothing at all. And that's the classic, the greatest thing in life is love, and it costs nothing at all, just to share it and give it. But it saddens me to see people put out great expenditures of money for a weekend of leisure, and whatever that might be, skiing, sailing. The whole thing has been twisted around that leisure now is another thing that is profitable and fits into our success syndromes that we talk about in our society. And if you are successful, if you are indeed having the leisure, then you pay for it at great exorbitant costs. And what's interesting is that as people do that, increasingly they're finding less and less satisfaction in that type of leisure. And so the toys again are cast off.
It becomes more like
right?
work again. I think it's
Absolutely.
often described that way. One of the things that I like your point very much, and one of the things that thrills me very often is when there are good free things for people to do, free concerts to attend, for example, and opportunities to enjoy life. I remember when I was in Germany being struck with that about people going out to the parks on the weekend, and it seemed such a simple affair. They seemed to be enjoying life so much in the park without a lot of paraphernalia or a lot of consumerist notions going on. I think your analysis is right on the money, that really is a big part of the problem. Consumerism, leisure becomes one more consumer item, and it's taken over in that way. Glenn, I once wrote something talking about ways in which we might try to break through this idea and do other kinds of activities that could get us more in touch with a healthy notion of leisure. And I said things like this, trying to remind myself, I guess, as much as anybody else. I said, take off your watch when you go to worship on Sunday. Don't be thinking about how long it takes and so on. Go to a museum and spend all the time with one or two paintings, instead of this idea, I'm going to get through the whole museum and say that I got through it, and that's the big point. I saw the Louvre or the Prado or something, but to just actually drink in one or two paintings and mine the riches of what would be there. Read some poetry each day. There's a useless activity for you. It has no clear payoff, but simply the enjoyment. Take a leisurely walk with family or friends. Go on a short retreat once a month. Play a sport solely for the enjoyment, not just to win or defeat an opponent, but just for its own enjoyment. Take the kids to a sandlot baseball game. Learn how to cook. Meditate regularly. Things that I was sort of listing as ways of the whole point being that we're not here trying to accomplish or consume, but simply to drink in, to develop this passive, receptive, contemplative side of our life. That seems so important to me, this ability to deal with silence and to meditate.
Yeah, say one thing, Jim, too, about people in leisure. We're often taught, in our traditions at least, that we have to love everybody. I think that's true. You don't necessarily have to like everybody. And I think there are ways to be more discerning about the people that we're with that will help us enjoy the time that we have that we would call leisure or free time. And that's also true in the workplace, too, is to screen out places where we find people that we don't like to work with, because there, again, a high percentage of people that are unhappy in the workplace are unhappy because of the people that they're around and have to work with day in and day out.
You know, one of my conclusions from that is that I think that you and I ought to go out and play golf together now.
Absolutely.
And carry on our conversation over the golf course, but or over the next shot. Or maybe not carry on the conversation and just enjoy the golf. I suppose that would be the way to do it.
Absolutely.
But, Glenn, I've appreciated your time and so on, but I suppose maybe I shouldn't think of it that way. I should think of this as being one of those moments that's just plain enjoyable in itself. If we didn't have to sit here looking at the clock that I only have 30 seconds more of this program, it would probably be better. But I think the conversation in itself is enjoyable. It seems it's stimulating, it's enriching, and you say something and it clicks off something in my mind. It hopefully, as people listen to us, it clicks off something in their mind, and it gives us more of this sense of drinking in and enjoying life, and not always just this sense of accomplishment. We are workers. That's an important part of our lives, and we'll always have it. Let's hope we can build some leisure into that, and let's hope that we can find ways to really have the leisure be the kind of thing that produces a fuller humanity for all of us.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian Father James Bacik, campus minister at the University of Toledo. Joining Father Bacik in this discussion was Glenn Hossman, the director of Toledo Campus Ministry and Metro Toledo Churches United. The topic of this week's Reflections was work and leisure. If you have any questions about today's program or any ideas for topics you'd like to hear discussed, please write to Reflections in care of WLQR, Toledo, Ohio 43623. Produced in the studios of WLQR, Reflections is directed by Mary Beth Kirchner. Reflections is brought to you by the Genesis Radio Network.